Hey everyone, on today's episode of BellTube, we are throwing everything and the kitchen sink at this video about what we got up to here in the month of January. We're going to talk about the books that I hauled. We're going to talk about the books that I read. Were they hits? Were they misses? We're going to find out. We're also going to recap a little bit about what we did on For Whom the Bell Tolls, talk about a couple of guests that we had, and of course we will get into some of the plans ahead for February. I'm pretty excited about this. Hold on to your hats, folks, and let's get this rocking. Okay, so the first book I have to share with you guys that I picked up in January is from The Broken Binding. And if you know me at all, you knew this was going to be a highlight today. Yes, Dr. Philip Chase, Dr. Fantasy himself's edition of The Way of Edan by The Broken Binding showed up a couple of days ago. And normally when I do unboxings, I put them on the Patreon or I put them in channel memberships. All that's listed below in the description if you are so inclined. But for this one in particular, I put it on all my socials. So again, in the description, you'll find my X account and my Blue Sky account. And I think Facebook is on there maybe, and I know Instagram's on there. So if you want to hang out on socials, that's where you can find me. But I put the unboxing of this one up on those because I wanted everybody to see it. Now, Philip did an amazing unboxing of the first time he saw this book himself, and he goes through and shows you all the interior art, both the full color illustrations and the black and whites. They're incredible. I will link his channel, of course, in the description of this video. But you guys, The Way of Edan is just a beautiful book in its contents, let alone the unbelievable treatment that Broken Binding has given it. This is a huge recommend for me, regardless of what edition you have, but I just really wanted to show this book off, and you're probably going to see this in a lot of videos coming up, just on my shelves behind me, because I do want to shout out my friends when I can, and this one is absolutely worth the shout out. All right, what else did I get? Now, same from The Broken Binding, we've got To Green Angel Tower. This is book 2. So I've not read any Tad Williams yet. And I know that a lot of you guys are really on me to do that. And when I get into what I've been reading and what I'm going to be reading, maybe a couple of you guys will lay off a little bit because the mountain of the TBR is tremendously gigantic. Anyway, speaking of tremendously gigantic, To Green Angel Tower is so big they had to divide this into 2 books for this special Broken Binding edition. There's no way they could have made it in the 1 volume because this is half of the book. It's a chonker. Anyway, it's got all the same unbelievably great Broken Binding treatment as some of the other books that I've shown on the channel before. Another book that I got, An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham. This is book 3 in the Long Price Quartet, as you can see by my TARDIS bookmark. I am about 30-40% into this book. We'll talk about that more in a little bit coming up. Another book that I got, and we're for sure going to talk about it, is The Ark from the Minton family. So that's John, and that's Amy, and that's Jacob Minton, who formed together J.A.J. Minton, and they wrote a book called Discovery. We're going to talk about it. I'll show a little graphic here of the cover. There's a brand new cinematic trailer out as well. You guys are going to be very impressed by this book. Just a little heads up. All right, what else did I get? All right, so I really want to send an apology to 2 people. The first is Andy Witham, A.R. Witham, because he sent me The Trial of Rooker Flynn, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago as an ARC, maybe even longer. And for whatever reason, I forgot to include it in my book haul videos. So I'm going to throw a graphic right here to it. I'm also going to put a link in the description where you can find out more about his book. Thank you so much, Andy. Another book, same thing. He sent me an ARC, I want to say back in December, and this was just randomly sent to me by a guy named David Block. And it's an interesting story. He wrote a children's book called The Dragon Codex, but he's also a designer, and he used the medium of a children's book to teach kids the, very fundamental principles of Design. Now, I'd never heard of anything like that before. I have not read this book, so I don't know whether to recommend it or not, but I wanted to share it with you here. One, because he was kind enough to send it, and secondly, because I've never seen anything like that before, where someone is instructing somebody on the very foundations of design through a fantasy book. So, kudos to you, David Block, for coming up with something unique and original. All right, so those are the books that I got. We're going to get into a lot about what I read in January. It's a lot, and it's really good. Of course, like I always have to do, right? Before we get into the books that I read for January, if you want to help me out a little bit, hit that thumbs up button on the video. It lets YouTube know to show it to more people. If you want to be part of what we're doing here more often and see BelleTube show up on your home feed, just hit the subscribe button. It is so simple to do, and we can hang out and discuss books all day long. The third thing, if you really, really, really want to help the channel, share it to your socials. It does make an impact. I have noticed more people doing that over the last couple of weeks, and I just wanted to say thank you for doing that in the first place. And of course, thank you to everybody who supports the channel on both Patreon and as channel members. But really, most important, like I said on the last video, the best thing you can do for your favorite content creator is to simply watch their videos. I will answer a commonly asked question here because somebody, I think Vera, figured it out. Somebody had asked, if I watch at double speed, does the content creator get full credit for watching the whole video? And apparently the answer is no. So just kind of bear that in mind. If you're buzzing through videos, you could be helping your favorite creators out a little bit more by watching them at regular speed. That's why I try to get out as short as videos as possible. I don't know if we're going to succeed in that today or not, but let's get into the books that I read. All right, so like I mentioned, I did receive that ARC from the Mintons for the book Discovery. Now, I'm not going to give a full review here because I don't know how much they want me talking about the book, right off the bat. I can give you some basics, right? It's coming out in the spring. Certainly follow Talking Story if you're not already. Their link will be in the description as well, and they'll give you all the kind of pre-order dates and all that good stuff. This book is a huge genre blend, okay? So it is post-apocalyptic in some regard. It is science fiction. It is urban fantasy. It is cosmic horror. There are a lot of elements that blend together to form this book called Discovery. And it's interesting because I know the Mintons fairly well. I can get a sense of who did what, right? Jacob is a cinematographer and a filmmaker and somebody who thinks very visually, right? And so this book plays like you're reading a movie, in some regard because one of the creators is thinking about it very visually. Now, Amy is a Master of Fine Arts, or that's her degree, and she is really the person that is charged with writing all of this down in a way that is both efficient with word count, but also extraordinarily descriptive and an enjoyable, book to read. And she's accomplished that in a tremendous way. John's an ideas guy, right? So if you watch Talking Story, and I know most of our viewers do, John is kind of like crazy idea man half the times. And if half of the crazy ideas that showed up in this book came from John, I would not be surprised. When they asked me what I thought about this book, I gave them one word, right? So I know that there's plenty of other reviewers that are gushing on and on about Discovery and telling you all the intricacies of the book. As far as I go, I told John, this book is a hit. And I mean it in every sense of the word. It hits so many different categories and so many different genres. I think this thing is absolutely gonna be a hit. I don't know how anybody would read this and go, oh, this is a bad book. There may be elements in it that don't completely work with everybody, but that's sort of the nature of having a genre blended book, right? You're gonna like some of the elements more than some of the others, right? I'm more of an urban fantasy guy. I'm more of a science fiction guy than I am a cosmic horror guy. But at the same time, the way they did this book, I kind of became a cosmic horror guy, particularly because they've done this where we're not just following one POV. we are following several POVs, and they're happening all over Earth. This is set in the 1990s, right? So you kind of have an awareness that we're in the modern world, but it's an alternate 1990s, and something has happened. There's been a discovery that's been made, and it changes basically the fate of the Earth moving forward and civilization. You guys are gonna love this book. I can't recommend it strongly enough. I'm gonna get all three of them on an episode of For Whom the Bell Tolls, hopefully sometime in May, so they can, shout about it and answer questions live with the chat as well. It's gonna be a huge recommend for me. Discover, what is it? Discovery? It's called Discovery. Discovery, like I said, it's a hit. Let's keep going. And speaking of hits, and speaking of January, or speaking of January, and speaking of John, because it was John's idea, along with myself, to do this giant read-along of The Wars of Light and Shadow. Of course, book one, I read it in January, Curse of the Mistwraith by Janny Wurts. All right, let's talk about this book for a second. And I don't know that I'm going to hold it up the whole time, because it's a chonker, man. This is a big book. This is my initial thought on Curse of the Mistwraith, and really arc one of The Wars of Light and Shadow, which this book covers. I was not surprised when I read this book. I read Ride Hell's Chasm back in, I want to say, April of 2024. And as you guys know, I am notoriously stingy about handing out 5 stars, when I rate books. And that one did get a 5-star because I hadn't read any, Janny Wurts prior. And I really fell in love with her writing style. I love the way that she constructs sentences. I love the fact that she can build themes into a relatively tight cast like she did into Ride Hell's Chasm. And we get all of that here with Curse of the Mistwraith, but we get it in a much bigger way. The book starts off really on page 1, and no, I'm not giving you any spoilers here, so I would pay attention to this. The book starts off really in chapter 1. There's a ship battle that has just occurred, and they are pulling survivors out of the ocean, right? And what happens in a ship battle is some of the survivors you're going to pull out were from your ship, right? Or from your side of the war. And some of the survivors you're likely to find in the water came from the other side. And that's exactly what happens here. They pull out somebody from the other side, and lo and behold, it is a very significant person from the other side. I'm going to leave it at that on who they pull out. But it basically starts off very adventure feeling, if that's a word. Adventure feeling, sure, why not? It's my channel, I can say whatever I want. Anyway, so we start off with this adventure, and then we start to learn about our 2 main characters that we're going to follow, I suspect, through the entirety of The Wars of Light and Shadow, just because it makes sense in how the book goes, and you'll get that when you read this book. But we start off with adventure. It lulls a little bit when we learn more about the characters, but not in a boring way, more in a deep diving character type of way. So if you're somebody that enjoys Realm of the Elderlings, if you're somebody that enjoys books that focus highly on character evolution, backstory, some lore, a little bit of world building, actually a lot of bit of world building, all of that takes place kind of in the first half of the book. By the time we get to the 50% mark, all the way to the end, we get a ton of action, and Janny Wurts is not afraid to write amazing action, and she still does it with all that great descriptive work that she does when she's building up characters. So we find that as the book goes on, not only does the quality of the writing continue to remain great, but now we're starting to see all the work that went into the first half of the book really shine in the second half of the book. And you don't find that in a lot of spaces, right? You either find books that are highly character driven and the plot and the action is just okay, or you get the other way around where the plot and the action is really the focus of the book and the characters are only so deep. They don't get, as deep as an ocean that Janny Wurts can write for characters. I know that this is going to expand, right? I mean, this is only a 600 and some page book. I know that of an 11 book series, and all these books are chonkers, I know we're going to get to know way more about these 2 main characters. We're going to learn way more about the sorcerers who are sort of behind a lot of the things and behind the scenes, along with, the best I could say is they're almost like witches. I don't know if that's the right word. Maybe. Johnny will probably correct me or maybe send me a message on what I ought to call the witch cadre that is there. The cabal? I don't know. Anyway, we're going to get a lot more of that, I think, as the series goes on. I know we are scheduled on February 15th to be over on Talking Story with myself and John, and there are so many other booktubers that have joined us along the way for this that I think there's probably going to be 8 or 9 other booktubers on screen, along with Janny Wirtz, which is going to be just fantastic. And then come March, we will be reading Ships of Merior, and if you can see behind me there on the shelves, that sucker is even bigger than this one. So I don't know if we're going to divide that in half or what we're going to do, but all in all, is Curse of the Mist Wraith worth your time? Because I think that's what you want to know. Unequivocally, yes, it absolutely is. If you like character work, of course you do. It's there for you. If you like great action, again, of course you do. It's there for you. Can't recommend it enough. Can't wait to get into Ships of Merior in March, and we're going to go from there, but I'm all in for this Wars of Light and Shadow, and I want to thank everybody who is joining us along the way, not just booktubers, but there's so many viewers that are reading this along with us too. It's just making it way more fun. All right, let's move on to the next book. The next book that I read in January, and you can see I'm actually still reading it, like I mentioned, is An Autumn War by Daniel Abraham. This is book 3 in the Long Price Quartet. All right, so here are my initial thoughts on this book. I love it. It's fantastic. It started off better than books 1 or books 2, and there's been several people that have told me that this is their favorite in the series, either this book or book 4. And I can't disagree with them. This starts off with a complete bang. My only challenge I have with this book has nothing to do with the book itself, but it's a me thing. I put down Long Price Quartet probably about 2 months, maybe 3 months, and then engaged back into it. And the challenge is that these books aren't very long. They're like 300 to 350 pages, but the character names, I don't know why they're not sticking in my brain the way that other series do. They're kind of original and unique names. Maybe that's part of it. There's no, table of names or glossary, at least at the front. So I had to go back and look at the first 2 books to remember who a couple of people in this book were. And some of the new characters, I wasn't even sure if they were in the last book. And then I found out that they weren't, so I didn't feel so stupid for not remembering them. But like I said, that's really a me thing. I think how you might be able to, have better results is to not split these books up all that much. Like I said, they're only 300 or 350 pages. This whole series, I should say, right? All 4 books is shorter than Wind and Truth. So you could absolutely read these 4 books in a much shorter period of time than the way that I've spaced this out. I've tried to fit these books in where I can in between some huge chonkers. I don't know that that's the best strategy because I think people will get more out of the Long Price Quartet reading it mostly straight through. If you want to take a couple of weeks off between books, that's cool. I just don't think I would take a few months off between books because it will become a little bit challenging to remember all the events that have gone on before. But so far, so good. I'll report back in February my final thoughts on this book. But as a whole, Long Price Quartet is fantastic. I can see why people recommend it. I can see why it's a booktube darling. And I am going to join on that train right now, having really only, made it through 2.5 books. Long Price Quartet is where it's at. Let's keep moving. So I only did 1 audiobook the whole month of January, and that's crazy to me because I normally do about 2 or 3. This month I did The Primal Hunter 2 by Zogarth, and this is narrated by Travis Baldree. All right, so what I think of The Primal Hunter 2, really mixed reviews on this. So book 1 ends, book 2 starts, and it's almost like the first paragraph of book 2 belonged in the first book. Really, the first third of this book, at least, maybe even the first half, belonged in the first book. And I know that this was written as a web serial over on Royal Road, where the author Zogarth was making regular uploads, and sadly, it sort of reads like that. Now, I know some of you guys love web serials. I fall in the camp that I just don't like them. And here's the reason why, and this happens to be a very great example of it. Because there was no real natural ending point to the first book, book 2 starts off like we're still in book 1. And it was very off-putting and jarring to me that nothing had really substantively changed. We're literally the next minute after book 1 ends, we start in book 2, but it feels really awkward. And I actually found the first half of this book quite boring. You know, one of the things that GameLit and LitRPG gets knocked on a lot here on BookTube is that I don't want to read about a video game, or I don't want to read about leveling and grinding. And I'm usually the one saying, you guys, it's all about story. It's not always about grinding and getting levels and hearing stat boxes repeated over and over again. And if you've listened to GameLit, you know what I'm talking about. It's not always like that. I'm going to say on this particular occasion, they're right. It is. The first half of this book is super grindy. There are no characters. There's really just, Jake, the main character, and a couple of smatterings, I should say, of some of the cast from the first book, and that's about it. So the first half was not a hit for me. Now let's move to the second half of the book, because it totally changes in how the book goes story-wise, plot-wise, character-wise. And I think this would have been the better starting place for a book 2, because the second half of the book was really, really good. And we get a whole load of new characters, and they're all very compelling. And I want to find out what's going to happen with them, because at the halfway point of The Primal Hunter 2, I was not certain I was going to continue this series. Doug, who is a regular viewer of this channel, I know DNF'd the series after this book because I think he had a little bit different concerns than I do. He actually liked the first half of the book and didn't like the second half of the book. Normally, Doug and I agree here. We're kind of on opposite ends of the fence here. But I just want to say that the way that some of these web serials get written can be a boon or it can be a bust. And in this particular case, I think it's a bust. I will be reading The Primal Hunter 3, but it's most likely gonna be, I think, in probably about 2 months. Why? Because Dungeon Crawler Carl 7 comes out in a couple of weeks in February on audio, and I have specifically not read the physical book because I have to listen to Jeff Hayes. Also, I'm doing a sponsored stream with Podium coming up, and it's going to be for the mayor of Noobtown. I believe the author's name is Ryan Remmel, I think. I don't know. I'll put a thing up here. We can find out. But anyway, I'm going to be listening to that as well because I want to be prepared for when he comes on For Whom the Bell Tolls. And by the way, the voice actor on that book is none other than our friend of the channel, Jonathan McLean. Yeah, he's back and he is a blast. So I have to say, if you see a smile on my face right now, I am totally psyched to have Jonathan back on For Whom the Bell Tolls. He's going to be our first repeat guest, which is just coincidental and pretty darn cool. Did I just say pretty darn cool? Wow. All right, so let's keep moving. Wait, did you guys hear that? Yeah, I did hear that. Oh God. All right, so you know what? We were able to avoid this in December. I don't know if he was out on world tour or if he was in the hospital or what he was doing, but yeah, I just heard it. He's back, folks. Let's talk about January, and I give you Rick's picks with the one and only Rick Thunder. That's right, everybody. It's me, Rick Thunder. I'm back, and that's a fact. Okay, so this month for January, I read a book that I was so excited to read. I almost read it in December, but I didn't. So I should give you some backstory, right? In the 1980s, right, just at the cusp of the 90s, me, Rick Thunder, was asked by the Rolling Stones if I wanted to go on tour with them. Now, I love Mick Jagger. He's a close personal friend of mine. And we talked about one of our favorite songs that he wrote called Let It Bleed, right? And red's blood and blood is red and all that good stuff, right? So I didn't actually go on that tour because I might have been in the hospital due to a series of hot tub accidents that occurred in the late 80s, the early 90s, the mid 90s, and also in the late 90s. Anyway, so I didn't go on tour, but when I saw that they had written this book called The Bloodstones, I was like, oh, cool, Let It Bleed. The Bloodstones, one of my favorite bands, and that's a fact. Okay, so I read it, and then I was realizing, like maybe about 10 pages in, this doesn't sound like Mick Jagger. And then I looked at the cover, and it was like, oh, I wonder if this name, Tori Tekken, is his author name. Is that his pen name? And then I found out it is not his pen name. He's not actually Tori Tekken. Mick Jagger is not secretly Tori Tekken. So I kept reading the book, and I kept reading the book, and you know what, you guys? This book was really good. There was some really cool stuff. There's a little bit of magic. There's a lot of family drama. There's all the kinds of things Rick Thunder likes to talk about in the hot tub, and that's a fact. So anyway, do I recommend the Bloodstones? Do I recommend the Rolling Stones? Absolutely, I recommend the Rolling Stones. I recommend Mick Jagger. I recommend Tori Tekken. I recommend the Bloodstones, and that's a fact. Well, wow, Rick, thank you for whatever that was. Tori, I know you're a friend in real life, and I know you're a friend of the channel, and hopefully that was useful to you. I don't know. You guys, I never know what I'm going to get with him. He's Rick. That's all I can say. It's not he's good. It's not he's bad. He's just Rick. Okay, let's move on. Speaking of moving on, I want to talk about March, even though we're only talking about January right now. And that's because the Quilluminati is going to be reading Mystic River, and we're going to be discussing it over on Mike's channel. Now, most of you guys already know Mike has a gigantic Discord. He actually has now started its own channel within Mike's Discord for the Quilluminati. So if you want to chat with us, if you want to read along with us, if you want to discuss the books that we're going to be reading each quarter, that's really going to be the home for discussion on Discord. Many of you have asked me, by the way, why I don't have a Discord. I'm a one-man band, you guys. It's really difficult to do everything I do by myself, along with running my other business, which I do full-time. But if you guys are demanding a Discord, let me know in the comments if it's something that you would really participate in, because I only want to do it if I feel like there's enough people that would get value out of it. I just don't want to do Discord for the sake of doing Discord. Anyway, let's keep going. We had 2 fantastic episodes of For Whom the Bell Tolls in January. The first one was with the aforementioned Jacob Minton. If you've not seen that yet and you want to know a lot more about the producing mind behind Talking Story, and we get into an evolution really of how Talking Story began and its inception, all the way up to where it's at right now, along with all kinds of backstory on Jacob Minton. I will put a card right here and you can check that video out. He was fantastic to come on the show. I know he was a little bit nervous at the first, part, but man, he was just boom, right into it, and it is worth your time. Speaking of worth your time, I had a bucket list guest the following week with Bookborn coming on For Whom the Bell Tolls, and we had a complete blast. It's funny because I told her in the video, she reminded me of my cousin in that when she was growing up, she was very academically focused, was a straight A student, and I knew plenty of people like that, like I said, including my cousin, and I was always friends with people like that because I just respected their drive for academics. My drives were in music and in theater stuff and just kind of different things than straight academics, but I always had a respect for people that really put their focus into doing something that they've got their mindset on, and Bookborn is a fantastic example of that. And not only that, she's just a super fun person to hang out with. Her and I had never talked on any live stream prior to it. So yeah, I'm going to put a card right here. If you missed that conversation that I got to have with Bookborn, check it out. She's fantastic, and we delivered 90 minutes of just fun book talk. I hope you like it. So let's do a one for the road today. And this one's going to be very, I don't want to say controversial, but I want to be clear about something where my mind is coming from. And I like to use these one for the roads for that, because today's one for the road is all going to be about nonsense, right? And I know that I kid around a lot of times that BellTube has a certain brand of nonsense to it. That's the fun kind of nonsense. Today I want to talk about the not fun kind of nonsense and how we may be able to look at the world and sort of filter it out, right? a lot of people will refer to it as basically a bullshit meter, right? And the thing that I want to impart today is to kind of be aware of the fact that there's a lot of nonsense coming at us on a regular basis. If you are doom scrolling quite a bit on social media, or if you're checking the news a lot, which is easy to do, right? We live in a times where it's almost like something, you know, important is happening every single day, and we feel like we need to be on top of it. I would just suggest that we try to put our bullshit meter on full blast and try to weed through some of the nonsense. Now, we're not always going to be able to know truth from nonsense, right? We're not always going to know fact from bullshit, but to at least have the awareness that not everything that's coming at us is entirely accurate, I think is really important for a couple of reasons. One, because taking things as facts when we don't really for sure know, I think can be kind of troublesome at times. And again, I think if we think things through, we're a little bit more in a better position to come to our own way of thinking, our own opinions on what we believe to be true, given the, constant barrage of nonsense that comes our way. The other thing is mood. It is really easy to get down when you are inundated with nonsense. And like I said, not the fun nonsense, the bullshit nonsense. When that gets, thrown at us on the regular every single day, it's hard to stay positive sometimes. And you guys know I always talk about staying positive, and I get it. It's not always easy to do when we live in a 24/7 news cycle, when we have friends on our social media, and it happens to me too, where half of our friends think the other half of our friends are complete morons. And here we are trying to sift through what we think is accurate and it's not. My only thing with the one for the road today is to keep your bullshit meter on as much as possible without giving up your sense of adventure and creativity and fun. So don't go out looking for the bullshit, right? Because that's not a very fun way to live. But just be mindful that it's out there. Be mindful that it's coming at you in a lot of different ways, and be mindful that you have the ability to sift through it. You're a smart person. If you read books and you watch BookTube, I promise you, you are in the top 10% of humanity for the most part. So use those skills. Keep that in mind, and I hope that is of some value to you. January was a fun month. I'd love to know in the comments, what did you read in January? What do you got coming up in February? I'm doing these quarterly TBRs, so I didn't include that in today's video. But if you go back and take a look through now season 2 of the BelTube catalog, you're going to find out what I've got coming up in February. And let me tell you, there are some big books, starting with a Malazan in, it'll be like February 1st. I'm starting Midnight Tide, so that's going to be awesome. Until then, like I just said, stay positive. And of course, here's your fortune.